Good morning. This week, we're going to see an epic battle play out between free market capitalism and big government socialism. That's what's at stake. And clearly, when you see Speaker Pelosi's actions over these last few months, it's been to massively grow the size of government to appease her radical socialist base. And I think you're seeing the American people across the country express their anger and frustration because they're paying the cost of it already with higher inflation. Inflation's through the roof for so many things that people buy every day. Gasoline's up over 40%. When you go to the grocery store, you're paying 30 or 40% more. If you want to buy a new appliance for your house, you're going to wait months and months and still pay a higher cost for it. So President Biden's already broken his promise that his actions will not impact the paychecks of people making under $400,000 a year because the hardest working Americans and the lowest income Americans are the ones paying the biggest cost for the inflation already created by President Biden's failed agenda. And now they want to double down on it and put it on steroids. This would be inflation on steroids, tax increases like we've never seen before in the history of our country. The package that Speaker Pelosi is still trying to bring to the floor this week would be over $5.5 trillion of new taxes and spending, much of it added straight to the deficit, all under the name of leveling the playing field. Tell that to hardworking families who are already paying too much in taxes, who know that, for example, President Biden's energy tax in this bill, a tax on natural gas, is a new tax. It would hit the lowest income families the hardest. It would probably add about 14% to everybody's household electricity bills if they use natural gas. That is a violation of President Biden's promise to those workers, in many cases who make less than $50,000 a year. They're going to pay a higher cost for President Biden's agenda. We actually tried to take that tax out of the bill, and on a party line vote, every Democrat voted to continue charging new taxes to families on their electricity bills. It would hit hospitals, too, increasing the cost of health care. We tried to protect hospitals from having to pay these higher taxes, which will be passed on to families in the form of higher health costs, which, by the way, would be another violation of President Biden's promises that your health care costs wouldn't go up. Over and over again, we've seen broken promises, and the American people are fed up. That's why we are fighting against all of this radical socialist spending and these new taxes that are going to hurt families in America, that are going to be a gift to countries like China. Because if you think about it, you look at the Green New Deal policies that are in this radical spending bill. They exempt China from the major provisions of these bills. China's right now the country emitting the most new carbon. They're opening up 300 coal plants this year. America was reducing carbon emissions through ingenuity. We were making more things in America. We were bringing jobs back to America. We were growing our middle class under President Trump. And we did that by lowering taxes, by having regulations that actually make sense, that don't go out to pick winners and losers. And they want to reverse all of that and then exempt China. And President Biden's already shown he's willing to trade American jobs and give them away to foreign countries when he killed the Keystone Pipeline on day one of his presidency. It's one of the reasons Americans are paying 40% more for gasoline at the pump, because President Biden's gone after American energy, but he hasn't gone after all energy. He was just a few weeks ago begging OPEC and Russia to produce more oil at the same time that he blocked American companies from producing oil here at home, where we actually have better environmental standards than in any OPEC country or in Russia. And yet he greenlighted a pipeline so that Russia could create jobs in their country while killing jobs in the United States. It's catching up with the president. People are paying attention and people are fed up. They don't want to pay for all of this big government socialism, and yet that's where we are. That's what's going to play out this week. There's crisis after crisis that was created by President Biden, and he's the one that should step up and say enough is enough and start working with Republicans, start following through on his promise. Here in the House, Sam Graves, the leader of the Transportation Committee, has been wanting to work on a bipartisan infrastructure bill, yet he's been shut out of the process from day one because they want to go forward with their go-it-alone bill. In their bill, by the way, they have over $100 billion in Solyndra-style slush funds. Slush funds are not infrastructure, yet that's part of their new spending. That's not where we need to be going. We should be focused on helping fight for those small businesses, for those families who are struggling. We should be focusing on lowering inflation, not spending trillions more dollars in new taxes and new spending that will only increase inflation and hit the lowest income families the hardest. So that's what we're going to be focused on this week. We're going to continue fighting for those hardworking families and against this big government socialist agenda. With that, I'd be happy to take some questions. Yeah.
Two questions. The first one is, would Republicans be willing to support a clean CR if it's decoupled from the debt ceiling?
Well, we tried to get the CR decoupled from the debt ceiling last week, as Kay Granger just talked about, and the leadership on the Democrat side had an important decision to make. They had some of the most radical elements of their far left that did not want Israel to get the replenishment of their Iron Dome missiles. This is a defensive system that was a partnership between the United States and Israel to help protect them against terrorist missiles coming into Israel, which, by the way, thousands of terrorist missiles came in from Gaza earlier this year. They needed to replenish those missiles, and that was in the bill. And their far-left radicals said, we don't want to support Israel and have that funding there, so take it out. We said we don't want the debt ceiling in there because we had agreed last year on budget numbers that paid for the relief packages under COVID done under President Trump. All of those were negotiated. They were all bipartisan, and they were all passed in a bipartisan way. This year, they've gone it alone on all their spending, and yet they want us to pay the debt for it. And so we said, you've got to pull out the debt ceiling, and we would support the rest of it. And when they had that decision to make, instead of jettisoning the debt ceiling, they threw Israel under the bus and jettisoned the Iron Dome funding. It was a disgraceful moment, and ultimately, we stood up and said, we insist that you help support Israel replenish the Iron Dome missiles.
Republicans would support a clean CR.
We've said if you negotiate with us, again, it's got to be a negotiation with Republicans to ultimately come to an agreement, which is how it's always been. When we've had bipartisan agreements in the past, bipartisan means you work with people on both sides, not just in one chamber, but both in the House and in the Senate. They've yet to do that. We've encouraged them to do it. Kay Granger and her team are ready to go. But it's time for Speaker Pelosi and, frankly, for President Biden to fulfill their promise of working with everybody and actually do it, which they've yet to.
Liberal Democrats clearly fear that if the infrastructure bill passes, moderates will peel away from the reconciliation bill. Why don't you see the same thing, the same dynamic? Why don't you see the best way to kill the reconciliation bill is to give moderate Democrats a win on the infrastructure bill?
Well, first of all, we tried to work with Democrats on an infrastructure bill. And again, Sam Graves laid out the foundation for a $450 billion infrastructure bill, which was roads, bridges, ports, waterways, broadband, things that everybody would consider infrastructure. And the Democrats didn't want to even enter into that negotiation. That, by the way, would have been the largest infrastructure bill in the history of the country because they wanted to just have a multi-trillion-dollar bill, a bill that was over $1 trillion. For some reason, that's what they were fixated on. And so that started this process that initially some senators, both Republican and Democrat, had thought they had an agreement with President Biden. And within an hour, Speaker Pelosi and Chuck Schumer went and demanded that President Biden link the two bills, infrastructure with taxes and spending. And from that moment on, you can see statement after statement from prominent Democrats saying that the bills are linked together. And so once they linked them together, it changed the dynamic and it shut Republicans out of the process over here. And so, whether or not their members, and it's really a fight between socialists and liberals over there. There are no moderates left, and you can look at the voting records. None of them are voting like moderates. They're either voting like liberals or socialists, and there is a fight amongst the two. But at the same time, show me a time when the liberals stood up to Nancy Pelosi. There have been many deadlines where Speaker Pelosi said, you're going to get a vote on infrastructure by itself, and she blew by the deadline. Last night, she promised again that there would be a vote on infrastructure, and she blew by the deadline. So every time that they've thought they had a win and an agreement to separate the two, Speaker Pelosi linked them right back again, and that's where we are. Yes.
So given the very narrow majority that the Democrats have and that progressives are still a little bit weird about this infrastructure vote that's coming on.
A lot of people should be weird about that. It's a very dangerous bill for America.
How confident are you that every single member in your conference is going to be voting against the infrastructure bill coming up? I mean, I'm talking about every single one.
Well, obviously, you've seen some of our colleagues in the press saying that they support that bill. We whipped against it among many reasons, because Speaker Pelosi and President Biden have put them together as a package, meaning both the tax and spend 4.3 trillion and the 1.2 infrastructure is a $5.5 trillion package. And so we've whipped against it, and we're working to keep that number as low as we possibly can. But again, you've read some of our colleagues in the press saying they're for it. You've read a number of Democrats saying they're against it. All this is going to come to a head maybe this week, but for all we know, Speaker Pelosi might drag this on and on because every time that there's been a deadline, they fail to meet it.
Congressman, what do you make of talk that Democrats may bring a clean debt ceiling measure to the floor as early as today? And if they do it, what outcome will you expect?
Well, I spoke to the majority leader last week during our colloquy about this, and it seems like it's going to play out in the Senate right now because the bill that was sent over from the House includes the debt ceiling. It's very clear the Senate's not going to take up and pass that bill. They're going to have to do something different. But I think right now it's in the hands of the Senate to determine how they can get to an agreement. Reconciliation is one of the things that's been discussed on the debt ceiling side, but ultimately they sure haven't included us in those conversations, so I couldn't tell you where they're going to go with it.
So you're not expecting to see it in the House?
Well, it's in the Senate right now, and they haven't tried to engage us in a negotiation on it. They've just asked us to vote for their spending. And by the way, their debt ceiling increase that they brought forward was not to pay for things that we all agreed on last year. That was already paid for in bipartisan negotiations. What they're asking for is a blank check between now and the end of December of next year. That was the vote that was taken. So imagine all those Democrats who voted to extend the debt ceiling for things that they don't even know they will ultimately vote for through December of next year, when they've already spent trillions of dollars and they anticipate spending $5.5 trillion in this massive bill that would destroy American jobs.
Would it be a bigger challenge to muster a unified opposition against a clean debt ceiling, or do you think that?
Well, you saw a unanimous vote against the debt ceiling last week when it came up attached to the CR after they jettisoned Israel's Iron Dome defense funding. And we'll let the budget ranking member
I'd like to add
address
to
that too.
Since we're talking about the debt ceiling, when we got noticed at 8:23 on Thursday evening of a hearing, I sent a letter to the chairman of the Budget Committee on Friday, asking that he revise the hearing notice to include revision of fiscal year 22 budget to include the debt ceiling. Mitch McConnell has said clearly just last week how the Democrats can raise the debt limit by themselves and how he will allow it to happen. Secretary Yellen came out today that the debt limit expires on October 18th. The Democrats had the opportunity on Saturday to start the process that Mitch McConnell laid out that said that he would allow to go forward, and they refused to do it. At the start of the budget hearing on Saturday, I made a motion. To postpone the hearing until Monday so that we could revise it and start the process that Mitch McConnell suggested. They failed to do it. It's in their hands. They control the House, they control the White House, they control the Senate, and they have the process and the tools at hand to raise the debt limit by themselves, and they're refusing to do it.
And think about this, they haven't even gotten a Congressional Budget Office score for all of this massive tax and spending that they plan to bring to the floor possibly this week. We've asked for a CBO score. They've acknowledged they don't have one, and they might not even bring it to the floor with a score. So nobody knows what the cost of this is. We know it's in the massive trillions, and the number only keeps going up. That's the biggest concern, is every time you get a revised estimate, because it's not even official, the estimates keep going up by the trillions of dollars. People are looking at this thinking this is insanity, because it is, and it's driving inflation, and they want to drive inflation through the roof. We'll do one more. Yes.
Do you know how many of your members are planning to vote for the infrastructure bill?
Yes, I do.
Can you share that number with us?
No. We'll continue to have conversations with those members. I think you all know the rules of the whip operation. We talk to our members. We respect that confidentiality, and we're continuing to have those conversations. But in the meantime, I would invite all of you to come tomorrow night to Washington National Ballpark, where the Republicans will play the Democrats in a very spirited, friendly competition. Over 26,000 tickets have already been sold, so I'm not sure how many the Nationals pull in, but we're going to be pulling in a large number, and we're going to raise about $2 million for local charities as we work to beat the Democrats on the baseball field tomorrow night in the middle of all of these other big contentious issues. So with that, thank you all, and see you on the ball field.
What position will Marjorie Taylor Greene